Let's have a round of applause for our esteemed guests. So we are together, me mostly by asking the questions and keeping us on track to try to less. We're going to turn into pumpkins at 8 p.m., right, Dean? You have to run. We are going to wrestle with how universities can remain true to their highest calling. So first, I'm going to frame the purpose sort of this panel with a general question that you can all answer it, or one of two of you can jump in, and then I'm going to move on to some questions that are targeted and specific to each dean, because I think they each have their own challenges being in different areas of universities. And then we'll have some more general questions and some time for Q&A at the end. But first, to kick us off, how do each of you define the fundamental purpose of a university in relation to open inquiry? And how do you balance that against other demands like vocational training, service, reputation, or revenue generation? All the challenges of a dean. Who wants to dive in first?
You call on, that's best.
I get to take my cold calling skills.
You can start from Susan back this.
Dean Rivera,
Okay.
do you have, how do you grapple with this and define this fundamental purpose of university?
Sure, I'm happy to start us out. In fact, I really believe that universities they exist, full stop, to expand human understanding and knowledge. That's what we're meant to do. And we do that through research, through discovery, through teaching, through inquiries. But we absolutely cannot do that work without open inquiry. That is, it has to be said that there's no way we can do that work otherwise. And that involves a lot of things. It involves cultivating, a sort of culture of thinking and open discussion and questioning assumptions, not just absorbing information. It involves protecting academic freedom, which is first and foremost. And our instructors and researchers have to be able to explore controversial and unpopular ideas freely and argue and debate them if we're to expand knowledge. It is core to the mission. And I think it's often we lose sight of this, but I think it's really important that our sort of open inquiry cannot be done in the sort of echo chambers of the academic world, right? So in our classrooms, in our higher ed spaces, they are meant to be for the public good.
Yeah.
And I think we cannot lose sight of that. And in terms of your question of sort of balancing that inquiry, open inquiry, with other demands, I'll just say that I don't really think of it that way. I sort of think of open inquiry as being sort of, if you allow me a metaphor, the backbone of everything we do at the university. And so if we don't have open inquiry, we won't be able to stand up and deliver what we're meant to deliver. And we can't sort of surgically remove open inquiry. We will collapse if we do so.
Yeah. Thank you. Dr. Celenza?
Ditto.
Ditto? Yeah, that was really well articulated. But Johns Hopkins is a private institution. So is there any unique, it's interesting, this idea of public good. Does that resonate with you as you think about that highest calling?
Yeah, no, look, I think the basic ideas of discovery and research, education and formation, and then in all the realms that we can, serving the world by having that increase of knowledge is really important. I think any university, whether it's a public or private university, is still a nonprofit. And so in that sense, I think we definitely owe the public explanations of what we're doing. If I had one little footnote to add, it would just be that I think the moment we're in now demands everything Dean Rivera was saying and more, because I think that we are living through an unprecedented moment in the way that information circulates among people. And so I think the days of equating academic freedom with a cloister are over. And I'm a historian of the European Middle Ages and Renaissance, so I love cloisters. But I think the cloister days are over. In other words, anything we do now is going to get perceived in some way by the outside world. And we need to be conscious of that. It doesn't mean we have to shape what we're doing necessarily, the research questions, but we do have to be conscious that even as specialized knowledge such as is often produced in universities will not be legible to everybody, we should be conscious of building registers where we can explain to the public why it is a good thing for us to be doing, why it's interesting. And I will say, just to keep the floor for one more minute, whenever I've done that, I've found that the public has a great curiosity, not for watered down knowledge. They really want to hear what's new. It's just you can't speak in footnotes, you can't speak in the inside baseball fields. And so I think it's a very important thing. In fact, in our School of Arts and Sciences, one of our 4 strategic pillars is called public voices. It's precisely to engage in that kind of activity. So anyway, thank you for the question.
So that interaction with the public and serving the public is part of that higher calling. Yes, the inquiry and the free inquiry, but not keeping it cloistered, keeping it within the ivory towers, as the people on the outside like to say, sharing it.
I think that's right. I mean, I think, you could imagine almost any given field of inquiry is going to have at its, where the new knowledge is being discovered, it's going to be decided among specialists, right? So it's going to be a language that not everybody can really understand. It's most obvious of the sciences, it's very hard to read a physicist's paper if you're not a physicist, right? But it's also true in very advanced, imagine somebody writes a brilliant prize-winning book, history book, that wins a prize in their association, but it's not quite written for an accessible way enough for everybody, but it needs to be kind of detailed. We would like to find places for the author to do podcasts about it, to do op-eds, to relate it somehow to the world in which we're in. And I will say the current generation of scholars who are kind of coming up now for tenure and coming up for full, they're habituated to it. So in that sense, I think there's a fertile ground to plant these seeds at this point.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Dean Konana, other than ditto, do you have anything to add?
I'm about to say ditto twice. Let me take a different twist. I mean, I was thinking what I can say differently. What is the origin of tenure? Right? It was to pursue open inquiry without any fear. That was the origin of it.
Right.
Because there was political persecution of faculty trying to say something against the government, against the religion, so on. That's why the tenure came in. It was actually didn't come for engineering and sciences. It came in liberal arts. Right? That's the origin of it. That was to challenge the way we live, with the basic assumptions, to have the free mind to be challenging and pushing the boundary. It was not so much about science and engineering. It came later. It came in liberal arts. If I'm correct me here if I'm wrong. So that was the foundation. So when we did our strategic plan, and I put among the 4, I was very insistent that I put that to our senior associate dean, who is in Johns Hopkins now. Here God is. They said we need to put intellectual freedom and curiosity as one of our guiding principles. The question was, isn't it obvious? It was not for most people.
Yeah.
And that's why Heterodox was started by Jonathan Haidt.
Yeah.
And I read his books, and I love his book on Coding of the American Mind. And if you read that, the questions we are seeing today is because somewhere, somehow, we lost our way by echo chambers, group thinking. That came into academia, and that's where the challenge started for us. And that's one of the reasons why we put this in the strategic plan, as we do everything based on challenging what we do. It has to have. There are people who come to me completely against my belief. It's perfectly fine, as long as you don't get personal. Right? And that's what we are pushing. That's the origin of tenure. I don't think why we have to debate at all, why we have to question about open inquiry. It is what we meant. I'm a big believer of Chicago principle. This university should be a place for the critics, not to be a critic itself. And I'm a big believer of that. And we have seen universities violated that basic principle too. And that's why we got into this debate.
Yeah.
I think this is a place where, and I just want to take 30 seconds. This very first time when I took the class in 1989, one of the students in the class vehemently resisted what faculty said. I said, nope, I don't agree with you, with the finger pointing at the faculty. And we're all coming from India. What the heck? This student is questioning the faculty. The reason why this country progressed so fast is because the students questioning the status quo, questioning what the so-called experts said. That's how you push the boundaries,
Yeah.
right? And that's when even today it stuck with me where he had his leg up too, which I don't agree with that. On the thing, he is to be able to question the faculty.
Yeah.
And that's what makes this country and the universities great. So it's not a question to debate. That's what the universities are for.
Right. So you all, I think I've heard them all agree that that is the purpose of the university. But I know I've had personal conversations with people here at UMD, and I'm sure you have at your institutions, that's hard now. That some students don't feel like they can put their feet up on the table and challenge you, right? Right. So that's our challenge, is to provide spaces for them where they really do believe us, that they're allowed to challenge us and challenge the status quo. Right. So I'm going to get into some questions here that are a little tailored to each of you and your unique backgrounds. I think what we just discussed grounded us in the purpose of this conversation. But now I'd like to hear maybe a little bit more how open inquiry plays out in your specific contexts, if that makes sense. Right. So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Celenza. You've already shared a little bit about your background. As an historian of Renaissance thought, you've written about how traditions of scholarship shape civic life. What lessons from that humanistic tradition can we carry into today's debates about intellectual freedom on campus?
Well, I've got about 3 hours of remarks.
We were well prepared for this question.
I often reflect on this, and I think that some of the things we're already talking about have very long histories in the history of universities. And so if you were to go back in time and find yourself at the origins of universities as we knew them in the European tradition, and you zeroed in around the year 1200, you'd start to see this model evolving where you had faculty where what are now called the arts and sciences, what were then called the liberal arts, were taught. If you finished that course, you would get a degree called a baccalaureus artium. If you did more, you get a magister artium in the Latin language of their day. That's the sources that we have. And then there were 3 doctoral faculties. That model grows to such a point that you can kind of count how many there were. In the year 1300, there were about 15 in Europe, and by the year 1500, there were well over 60 of them. So what that meant was that on the one hand, that model was very successful. It was successful enough that different European city-states wanted them. It was a sign of cultural prestige and so on. And yet, at the same time, during that 200-year period, you start to see this phenomenon called Italian Renaissance humanism emerge. And it's one of a tranche of a type of critique of universities that you see. And the critiques are, guess what they are? You use jargon. You investigate questions just because they're on the curriculum and you just do it over and over and over again. You're hyper-specialized. You're just writing about each other's work. We can't understand you outside of the university. So you see these things even in that period. And so I think that the lesson for me from the period of the Renaissance is that some of the Renaissance figures I most admire are ones who, even if they were university professors, they adopted a kind of posture that enabled them to situate themselves outside of the institutional context and look in. And I think that's a very valuable kind of move, because I don't think that there's ever any malevolence involved. In other words, I love our faculty. I really do. I respect them and admire them. But I think when you put any of us in groups and we do the same things over and over again, it's a little like farming, right? Where you have rituals and you do things for a few years at the same time and you do it, and all of a sudden after 2 or 3 years you think, well, it's always been this way. But sometimes, you got to move from farming tobacco to farming soybeans, right? And so I think that what we need to do with each other, really, as faculty members first, is we've got to remember that we should be willing to challenge each other in ways that I think, as the dean was saying, that are never personal, but even vehement, but not personal, right, about the ideas themselves. So that period, the Renaissance, I think there's a lot there. And I think, as you go on in the history of universities, you see a lot of different moments where there have been challenges to what we would call academic freedom. There are challenges in the 13th century to academic freedom. In the year 1277 in Paris, a bishop named Etienne Tempier came up with 219 opinions that he thought were unworthy of university faculty discussing. And there were things that were very important to Christian thinkers at the time. Things like, was the human soul immortal? What's the best discipline? Is it philosophy or theology? Things that maybe don't make a lot of sense today, but if you start thinking about things like CRISPR, right? We can gene edit babies, but should we gene edit babies, right? That's an equivalent kind of a question. The same sort of passions would be aroused. And so we've got to be the place, and I agree with the Chicago principle, that's the place where the critics go. The university has to let the critics talk to each other. So that's how the history has inflected it for me. I do think about it a lot, and it's interesting just to see patterns over time.
Interesting. Thank you. So, D. Rivera, many behavioral and social science fields deal directly with politically charged issues. Race, inequality, policing, climate, the list goes on and on. How do you help departments create climates where faculty and students feel free to explore controversial questions without fear of backlash? There's a lot of charged topics in BSOS.
We have all of them in BSOS. Everything on the do not say list. And it's really, really difficult and intentional work to help create this climate and this environment where people can really talk to one another. And both myself and my associate deans and senior staff, we spend a lot of time trying to help our units really create that kind of environment where that can occur. And I think, we lean upon some guiding principles, and one key one is this idea that unity is more powerful and more productive than disunity. And so when we come together and can actually talk to one another, it's more powerful and we'll get farther. And by unity, by the way, I don't mean like at the end of the day we all agree with one another. It certainly is not that, but that everyone can, what's rooted in this is that you have to believe, or you have to at least suspend disbelief, that every human has dignity and the right and can and the ability to share their opinions and to hold their opinions. You do not have to agree with their opinions. The best thing you can do is look for common ground. But that can only come when you hold these unwavering principles in mind. And this is not one and done work.
Yeah.
This is a little toolkit that we put together, and we have to, drag it out to the next situation and the next situation. And then this fraught time, we're packing up our toolkit and taking it on the road a lot. But I think if you can sort of solidly ground the discussion and the culture of the inquiry in this, we all come to the table with our human dignity and something to share. And you can actually come to common ground with people that you vehemently disagree with. That's really the best tool we have in the toolbox.
I'm curious, are you doing that? I hear you, the message it's with faculty. Is that manifesting itself in any sort of like, are the syllabi and BSOS have, this on there? Are they sharing that so that the students have the same message, or is that individualized? I'm just curious what your observation's been.
So, of course, there's no dictation of what goes.
Yeah, I know.
But we do have a lot of
strong recommendations sometimes.
Recommendations sometimes. There's discussion about what's going to work, and we have very varied disciplines in BSOS.
Yes.
So we go from geographical sciences, which is mostly like remote sensing and sending things up to the space station, to economics, to psychology, sociology, African American, Africana studies. Right? We really are very varied. So there isn't any one size fits all solution, but I think the basic principles, we do try to ground our faculty and our students in those basic principles, that, everyone deserves to be heard, and that respectful dialogue can occur, not to shy away from it. And I think that's one of our biggest challenges right now is really, if I might just add one thing, I think the biggest challenge, not just for BSOS, but for all of us, is to convince not only students, but in some cases faculty, that this kind of inquiry is worth engaging in, right? That it is a worthwhile enterprise, because it is hard. And it is far easier to steer away from difficult conversations,
yes,
or to tiptoe around the margins. But to go back to the backbone metaphor, if I may, we lose our backbone if we do that. And we will not be able to stand up as institutions.
Yeah. Yeah. Dean Konana, thank you, Dean Rivera. So your own research background is in IT and decision sciences. In an era dominated by data analytics, how do you encourage students and faculty to remain open to perspectives, intuitions, or theories that data alone can't capture?
Can I change the question a bit?
Yeah.
You know,
Who can answer whatever question you want? Remember, that's how this works.
oh yeah, that's fair. And that's a lot of companies do that. You know, when when you invest in the market, there's only one purpose. To
Make money?
your return. That's it. Even in investing, people are succumbing to their own biases.
Yes.
They form their own groups. I hate Apple, so I look at messages that I hate Apple, and they short the stock, right? I love this stock, I invest in it even though you're losing money. So it took us 5 years to publish this paper. We actually show that in social media. When I say I am long in this stock, I ignore all the bad news. We show it actually with how people pick the news. And if I short in the stock, I ignore all the good news and pick only the ones that are bad news.
Reconfirming.
When in investing, we believe in our biases to control to be worse off. Imagine any other field, in any other area. You'll do exactly the same thing in steroids. So these biases in heuristics, I have a very technical background, but I have studied.
That's psychology.
Yeah, psychology. So I'm very technical. I switched very fast to Kahneman's work and Tversky's work, and that's where I did bulk of my work. Cass Stein, in his book, Republic 2.0, it came out just as a introductory note. He didn't even actually publish. If you look at the excerpt, basically said the end of democracy with social media. This was 2001 when the book came out. Because people are very well known, you're a historian, you know. People like to believe what they want to believe. And homophily and other things are very strong. So it has its own market. And we know that even in decision making, and there are people who have studied these things, managers behave exactly the same way. They work based on their biases. That's the way it is. Right? It's very strong. How do you unbias is the training that we have to do for the students. Right? And I had to thank Rashri and entire your group who are working on that. We did that, you did that, not me, on ESG investing. Is the government's, this is a place I should openly talk and not
Yes.
hide. Okay.
Yes.
The previous government basically said pension funds should invest based on ESG.
Right.
And I'm sitting here as, really? What is the evidence that ESG investing actually returns enough money for the pensioners? Why would he invest it? So there was an event. They brought in two different people. They did a survey of the students, what they believed, which most of them agreed with that. After the debate, what happened? They flipped. That's what we should be doing that. Show evidence, provide rationale to be more careful with what data you want to consume. Human mind consumes what it wants to see. And how do you break out of the cycle is an art. If we knew the answer, by now we would have misinformation, disinformation, none of them would have existed. But that's what Kassenstein wrote. These things are only going to get exacerbated with social media. No. And I have an op-ed in The Hill before, I think it's 2019 or 20. You can have any regulation you want. You can't stop it. Human beings will consume what they want to consume. We are seeing it today. And if you put constraint on Meta, there is something called Truth Social. They create their own, get their own people, and reinforce their belief on that. That's the way it works. So it's a hard problem, very hard problem. Actually, sending a human to the moon is actually easy. Breaking this cycle is very hard. And I think you have neuroscientist here, you're a historian here. I think you both agree on that.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
it's very hard.
It's very hard. But if we know a little bit about how to start to break that cycle, it's calling attention to those biases.
Starts very early. You
Yeah.
cannot change somebody who's 50 years old. It doesn't work. Your mind is made up. It has to start very young.
That's to start early, but also if you're, even if you're 50, call, really an open space of inquiry where people can, and where biases can be brought to the fore. I mean, unless someone really doesn't want to engage, there is good evidence that you can start to shift.
Yeah.
Maybe their core beliefs will still be there, but you can start to shift behavior.
Good.
That's the best we can hope for.
Again, free inquiry. So I want to convince the crypto people that there is no value for crypto. I can't. Mind is made up. Crypto has a lot of value for them, and I can't break that. I don't convince me if they can. I don't know. This is the problem with human mind.
I mean, I do think, just though, I will say, I think this issue of change is very important because when we talk about diversity of viewpoints, for example, that's something that I think we are all coming to believe is a good thing.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean that people's viewpoints should be immutably diverse, right? Like you should be able to change them, right? And that's, I think, where we sometimes get hung up, right? When we want to, find solutions, we want to put people who are in one camp and another camp and just and have them like fight it out somehow. And instead, I think we need to find environments where they can really hear each other. And maybe they won't change, but at least there's the opportunity to have change. I think that's an interesting conundrum as well, along with the technology, as you're pointing out, which is a big.
That's why universities is even more important for free inquiry than ever before. This is a time when the mind can be changed because it is not solidified yet.
Well, yes, it can be changed, but to me, I think it can be taught to do this. It can be taught to be open to other people's points of view. It can be taught to do research or discern fact from fiction, right? It's not necessarily that everybody walks in the door and we need to have them walk out the door thinking a different way or having a different set of, like you said, core beliefs. But do they have the skills and the tool set to be capable of open inquiry, to be capable of challenging their own assumptions, right? And it sounds back to like that first question. It feels like part of that highest calling of a university, right? And why do we gather all these young minds to teach them? I mean, at a business school, I'd asked you a pointing question at IT. At business schools, we are a little more vocational, maybe, than people who study something in the arts and humanities, let's say, right? Although somebody there might be on their way to a vocation, the way they're taught is less vocational, right?
I disagree.
Oh, okay.
Because when it becomes vocational in its teaching, then the critical thinking doesn't exist. So that's why I disagree with that.
Okay.
Relly is here, Ashri is here. You sit in their class, it's not vocational.
No, I agree with you. Yeah. I believe that that's what makes us very different at the Smith School. When I speak to people about business schools in the wild, in the outside world, they view them more as a vocational place than going to get a liberal arts education somewhere, right? Even if they study as undergrads. But I fundamentally agree with you, Prabhudev, that I think that's what's exciting and interesting and different here, is somebody can get an accounting degree here and then go sit and become get all the hours to become a CPA. But on the other hand, they also learn to critically think. It's not just about going to be the CPA. Could fundamentally agree there.
But I do agree, liberal arts education, social science research should be embedded deeply into everything we do.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we are, sorry to deviate here, but one of the things that we are pushing very hard to interdisciplinary thing is because historically business schools tend to remain aloof. And I think it's bad. I think we need to be we should deeply integrate ourselves in humanities and social sciences. It's fundamental.
And vice versa. I agree.
We're all humans at the end of the day, right?
Yes.
The principles are the same.
Yeah. So we've heard a little bit of different perspectives here, maybe coming from everybody's domain and expertise. But I have a few more questions. I think it's evident we all have shared challenges. Well, maybe let's dig in a little more deeply with a few more questions about sort of what our shared challenges and practices are. So this is for anybody who would like to answer. What does intellectual pluralism look like in practice at your institution? Can you share an example where a dissenting or unpopular view was constructively engaged rather than silenced? And this is a private, supportive audience. So if you have a juicy story to tell us from Johns Hopkins, we're waiting. Oh, I'm joking.
Well, I'm thinking about it. I think that a few years ago, after there was the attack on Israel on October 7th, or a few years ago, that was a moment that was very difficult for everybody, right? A lot of people. And I think that we felt at the university that we were a little bit too slow in providing the right sorts of opportunities for people to talk about the situation in general. And I guess I can say two things about this. The one is, we do have this wonderful political science professor named Stephen David, who for years has taught a course in Israel and Gaza. It became especially important after these events because the way he conducts the course, and there are Jewish students, there are Muslim students in the course, is he asks them what their opinions are on certain things. And then the assignment for the next week is they have to argue the opposite based on academic articles, right? They do that. And by the time the semester is over, the students themselves are the best spokespeople for the idea that this is complicated. It's hard to say it's really black and white. It's hard to say there's heroes and villains. I've learned a lot. I've learned to challenge my own beliefs. And so in that spirit, I think what we did do was we did create a series of fora where the first one was in person, where we had people, we wanted to make sure there were people who really had different perspectives together. The first one was in person, and it was difficult but civil. Right? I mean, it was really personal. This matters to people. Like, it's deep, it's emotional. And then we had a series of online events where the predicate was similar. So we had one, I was saying to our colleague, on issues connected to Israel-Gaza. So one was, what does free speech look like at universities? Right? I mean, you may have the right to chant, but you don't have the right to take over a part of the university that other students use. Things like that. So we had one event, one of the online events had Cass Sunstein, who was just mentioned, David French and Michael Roth, the president of Wesleyan, and we did about 4 or 5 of those online following up on this in-person one. And that felt like that was one way to have open inquiry. And we actually did an undergraduate class based on those that this same Stephen David taught afterwards. But it was because it was a challenge. There was something where it took a while for us to figure it out. And I think we all thought, and I think, I had long conversations with our president, Ron Daniels, who himself wrote a book on what universities owe democracy. So he's kind of set a tone of wanting to have this kind of open inquiry. And that's what we came up with. So that was one area where it worked, I think. And then there's just challenges all the time. I mean, the School of Arts and Sciences is very heterogeneous, right? We've got natural sciences, social sciences, humanities. They're all engaged in the pursuit of truth, but they have different cultures within departments. There are different microcultures within departments. And so the idea of bringing people together is always something we have to work on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Are you challenged by pluralism within those microcosms?
Well, one thing I felt is very important, and that's why I love a group like this, is that we're actually present together and we're with each other. And so I generally do a faculty forum on some topic each semester. And last semester, the one was on basically viewpoint diversity. Mm-hmm. And we had a panelist of 5 faculty just talking about this issue. I'm talking about their experiences. We had one historian, Louis Hyman, whom I was mentioning earlier, who said that when he did his dissertation work, the most important intervention he had, he's a historian who works on the history of capitalism and business and things like that. He said the most important intervention he had was when he had a committee member who was a conservative committee member and asked him a question about debt. And he said it changed the way he thought. It didn't change his political party or his political affiliation, but it made him a better scholar, made him a stronger scholar. So we brought people like that together. And my hope was that, and we had the best attendance we've ever had for one of these. We had about 60 people come, which is, we have, 740 full-time faculty. So it's not everybody, but it was enough, to start the conversation. And I feel like that's something we have to just find ways to do more of. And I do want us to think about encouraging discussion within departments, because those events are always a little bit self-selecting. And it's never really as good as you'll get in departments. So I think the next step for us is to have those faculty champions, because we can't impose anything. I think all three of us would agree that the second we get up there and we start saying, you should do this, that's exactly the wrong thing. It's got to be faculty. That's right. It's got to be faculty
Grassroots
who come up and are willing to have the uncomfortable conversations in units, departments, whatever the articulations of the school are, is. So, yeah.
What about you, Dean Rivera? Do you have any examples on how this intellectual pluralism looks like in practice inside of BSOS or any department?
There are a lot of examples, but I think, I think coming up probably in government and politics, that they're teaching about democracy, they're teaching about free speech. There's often, just a lot of, let's call it opportunity, to really bring, disparate voices to the fore. I don't have an example that's like, this thing happened and and this was the outcome. I have a lot of examples where really hard discussions were had, and also, difficult things. Students go away and then they come to the dean's office and say, I'm not happy with what I heard my professor say.
Oh.
And what do we do in those situations? And we have a number of them, right? So we grab that toolkit I talked about before, we open it up, and we start the dialogue. And I'm really, really proud to say that in every example I can think of except for one, we came to a solution space with those students, with the professor, sometimes pulling in, our religious leaders. So sometimes, it was the, leaders at Hillel or an imam who came and helped us work through this. Yes. And so, it goes back to that dignity of every human and students in the same classroom who, hear something that is disparate to what they believe and come back, again, often to the dean's office and say, I feel threatened. I don't feel safe. So then, navigating that space of what is safety versus discomfort and how do we navigate that space, and discomfort is part of education. Threat is not, right? So we have to understand and start to have some ground rules for what constitutes threat, what constitutes, bullying behavior, et cetera, and what constitutes discomfort, because that is what we're doing. We're educating, right? Yeah. So I have pocketfuls of examples, but it all has the same formula at the end. You bring people together, you recognize the dignity of everyone who's coming to the table, you try to find common ground, but not agreement necessarily, and you pull in all of the people who can help you do that.
Thank you. Dean Konana, do you have any
3 hours or 3 minutes?
Pluralism?
No, fortunately in the business school, I don't face it, but for our events, I do get response from outside the campus, outside the business school, asking us to shut down.
Yeah.
Disinvite thing. For all the time I've said is, you're welcome to come and challenge the speaker. We're not shutting down. I think the stance you take matters a lot. Going back to this issue of why these things have taken much more intensity is that many universities have made safe space as a priority for the universities. And that's where the challenge starts. You're anchoring the students. There's a safe space for you, not discomfort to challenge.
Yeah.
I think many universities, I'll be very honest with you, is goofed up on it. So what happens is you are feeding to the students, there's a safe space. To be discomfort is problem. And that's why Jonathan Haidt's book on Coding of the American Mind, he keeps saying concept creep, where the use of word trauma became so dominant in history, right? Oh, I'm an emotionally trauma. The word trauma basically said, I disagree with you, I have emotional trauma. No. Disagreement is not emotional trauma. Right. Disagreeing is not emotional trauma.
Right.
When these things were pushed by many people, experts, and some of the newspaper without, let me mention, I read New York Times, I have subscription. They brought up these issues as as prominent students, feeding this information made things worse for the universities because universities had to react to it. Right? There's an article that says Asian Americans are privileged, and I'm saying, really? Do you know my life? Who is writing? These are the same people who went to Columbia, Harvard, are writing these things as privileged for others. No, you have no idea what they're like. Asian Americans, and there's not one monolithic thing. You have people from Vietnam who came as refugees. They didn't have the privilege of you going to Columbia. So the news media, everybody fed into this narrative. And the university has to now bear the brunt of it. Because they have to react, right, when media is constantly talking about it. So it is a systemic issue of that happened. People have asked me, oh, you're in a blue state and your university is all left. Look, nowhere even once. So we all go to the meeting. When did anybody say not to do this? Don't do this. I never got any of those things. You want to really do this kind of events? Go ahead. Perfectly fine. We never had. But where is this narrative that keeps circulating? I'm really annoyed at that they keep circulating that the university is that. No, university has never told me not to do certain things.
Yeah.
They never sanctioned anything. In fact, we have lots of events in our school. I have a text after the event of Mike Faulkner that said, I was so worried. I said, why are you worried? It went very well. That the feedback I'm getting is was the greatest event on the campus. But people believe that there is something. No, we are anchoring too much to the negative things, safety and other things. I think we need to stop that. Again, it's not coming from the universities. It's coming from outside to the universities. The universities are probably latching on to those words and anchoring.
So we need to advocate for ourselves more?
Yeah, we have to.
Tell good stories?
Yes, we have
Yeah?
to.
Susan?
Well, I do think, though, that not all universities are the same.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I do, so if you attend the sort of Big Ten Academic Alliance meetings and things, you do hear different stories from different deans and what they're up against. And so, I'm glad to say we are not prohibited from having whatever kind of event we want to have and handling it the way that we see fit. But that's not universal across this country. So I just think that's important for us all to be aware of.
I mean, maybe one footnote I would add is I like the idea of not anchoring on the negative, because I think even without, it's one thing about events and things like that, but I also just sometimes think that there is a lot of critique of universities from all different angles out there. And I think, 95% of the time, if you were going to parachute into a classroom at a university or somewhere else, you're going to find people teaching chemistry, teaching medieval Latin. Like, the last thing they're doing is indoctrinating people, right? It just sort of, and so like mostly it's going sort of okay. And I think in life in general, what I've learned, especially as administrator, is if like most stuff is going okay, that's okay. Like 100%, if it's not 100%, it doesn't mean everything is vitiated. So I think, those of us who love universities, we've got to make sure that we explain to the public why we do. Because again, the one difference is, why did these things take? Well, the reason they take is because the way that information circulates now is just so crazy. It's different. We're not built for this. And you would know more, Susan, right, with your cognitive science background. But I think, I've read cognitive scientists who will say things like, we're not even built for reading books as texts, let alone, being bombarded with text on screens every minute of every day, right? So it's kind of changing the way we behave, I think, yeah.
Very true.
Okay.
So I want to reinforce that. The universities, to a large extent, there may be exceptions, have been very good for open inquiry. I think there's a narrative that is false, that's circulating and reinforcing itself. When I've been in meetings, I've been thinking, no, it's not there. I mean, we have done events in our school. A lot of them disagree with we got for one event, I got 950 messages to the dean's office. I met those people. You're welcome to come. If they don't answer, actually I had Associate Dean Joe Bailey, you make sure the panelists will answer that question, right? We didn't cancel it. We were not fearful of those things. And I think we took a stance, and campus, by the way, campus news is going on. They asked me, have you taken enough precaution to make sure it's going to be civil? Yes. Nobody told us not to do this.
No, we're very highly ranked. My colleagues here probably know better that we're highly ranked by fire and all that stuff. So I want to open up. Bruce Golden is biting to tab. Let's answer a question. Kristen, please bring him a mic.
Just wanted to make sure that you were going to leave enough time.
Yes.
For us.
I'm starting it now. Thank you, Bruce.
Testing? Yeah.
Okay, I had a couple of questions or comments. In the business world, conflict is everywhere. And so in business schools across the country, there's a course or several courses on conflict resolution. And I'm wondering whether you think a course like that might be useful in your colleges. Again, I think one of the problems that I see is that too many of our students are reluctant to engage in discussions where conflict is involved. And yet, in the real world, there's no escaping, at least long term, from conflict. So that's one question. The other thing I wanted to say is that I had a discussion with the dean on our campus, and I think she's a wonderful person. But we had this sort of disagreement. She was telling me that her college was the most diverse college on campus. And I said to her, in some ways, maybe externally, maybe ethnically, you're right, okay? But in terms of culturally and politically, you're the least diverse on campus. And I wonder if you would maybe tell me what you think of that, because on many college campuses, and this is more view, you have some colleges that are much more political than others. For example, if you look at the College of Math, Computer Science, and Engineering, there's not a lot of politics, at least overtly, that you see from those schools. And yet from other schools, you see a great deal of politics. And in many cases, it results in acts that are clearly anti-Semitic, for example, if we go back 2 years. So what do you think of that observation that, on the one hand, my college is incredibly diverse, and yet, from a different point of view, it's the least diverse on campus?
So there are pockets that don't allow diversity or diversity of thought?
Well, I'm not saying they don't allow. I mean, this is generated by faculty members who have opinions, and they discuss their personal opinions in class. And maybe they make it difficult for students to respond with other opinions. But there's also a large element of peer pressure.
Okay. This is a complex question.
It's a complex question.
I'm trying to get to it so we can get our esteemed panel to
But I think the notion of diversity, is not used to mean the same thing as, a number of people might think.
Understood. Does anybody want to reflect on that?
Should we collect questions and then get responses back since it's getting close to bird?
Like 3 or 4 questions that have.
Sure. Well, let's reflect on this real quick, and then who has a question they would like to ask? Because maybe we don't have 3 or 4. All right, so let's start here, and then we'll move here, because it looks like we just have a couple. Yep. With the question we just heard.
Okay. So can I respond?
Please.
So I think this is a really important point, and I think this is just the right place to bring it up, right? Because diversity does not mean one thing. And I think we are too often going to that space where we're defining diversity by ethnicity or race or gender. And I think being very purposeful about diversity of thought is an important thing. And it's something that, I'm in behavioral and social sciences, but as I said, we have economists, we have, political scientists, we have geographical scientists, so very, very varied. So I would say it's something that we're talking a lot about is making sure that especially our classroom spaces are spaces where students don't feel othered. And that includes students with thoughts that are not the sort of mainstream thought of that subdiscipline, right? So you're not talking about me because we've never had this conversation. It's another woman dean on the campus, so it's a different college. But I can respond from the point of view of my own college, which is that I think it's extremely important, not just in the behavioral sciences or even humanities, but across all disciplines, to honor that as a sort of guiding principle, that everyone's thoughts and sort of background is taken into account and is respected. And that backbone that I talk about of we have to really have open dialogue and academic freedom, that applies to all of our community. And we have had students who have said to us, and this is why we're being very purposeful about it, I don't feel free in a classroom to express a very conservative thought if it's a classroom about race inequality, right? And that's not okay, right? So I think it's important for us to bring that up at any kind of forum that we have like this, where we're trying to promote open inquiry, we're trying to promote pluralism, that has to be across the board. And it's a hard conversation because it's not a popular conversation. We have a lot of faculty on the campus who would not want to hear me say that, right? But truth-telling, which, a lot of philosophers going way back have talked about, absolutely requires this. You cannot engage in truth-telling when you are in a room with people who think exactly like you do and people who behave exactly like you do. We don't get towards truth-telling that way. And I don't think we say that out loud enough on this or any college campus. So thank you for the question.
Yeah. So we have one more here. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. A common challenge that I face when working with administration and convincing them of the value of open inquiry is the thought that some students are, not equipped or ready to deal with it. And so as deans yourselves, what do you think would be an effective response to that claim, to that argument, and especially if those other administrators don't share your intellectual or ideological appreciation of discomfort?
Can I say on this one, I'm just trying to hide as much information private as possible. Recently, somebody I know in the school, their daughter in the 6th grade got beat up in the school. By assuming that this kid said something, an 8th grade kid beat her up so badly that it was emergency 2 days, and I had to get involved, and I had to get help and other things. So there is a lot of fear among students about those things. And there is a fear that has been built into the system. If I disagree, I'm offending you. This is a huge, a trauma that I'm creating in you. And that has been very dominant even in our school. People fear. Actually, I know in one class, faculty who taught that class, I had a student complain to me saying, we are uncomfortable to discuss these issues because I don't know how others will going to be offended and they're going to take revenge against us. And that fear has been deep among the students. We have to reinforce that this place from the time, we have to keep anchoring them. There is no space, safe space for you to your views. This is a place for you to hear other views, to be able to have civil discourse. And that's important. From the time they come into the school, we have to keep reinforcing those things. Unfortunately, there is an academic side and a non-academic side. Sometimes what happens on the non-academic side is to provide you safe space. Academic side wants you to give you discomfort. Mm-hmm. And you see this friction happening.
Yeah, maybe I could just pick up on this briefly because it unifies the questions. I think, right. I mean, I think people are very unprepared to disagree with each other publicly, is what happens. I think that even sometimes happens with faculty members as well. And so to get back to what you were saying, I think this notion that you've hinted at here and there, Dean Rivera, about the equal dignity and worth of all people, that does imply when we're in department meetings with our fellow faculty members, a certain almost reticence you have to have of speaking too quickly, a certain restraint. Because often the person who might be the one person who disagrees with the political trajectory in the department is just wary of saying it. And if they just had one more minute to say it, and if we could just take a beat, those people who might disagree with it and let that opinion be out there. And I think that's where we have to have conversations. I would also just add on the student piece. We have a sociologist at Hopkins named Andy Parrott who talks all about disagreeing publicly in this issue. And one of the things he did was he did a survey of our students. And what he found was that we were happy with our faculty in the sense that for the most part, the students didn't say that the faculty were conditioning them to think or behave in a certain way. They did report a lot of self-censorship, though.
Exactly.
And especially conservative students reported a lot of self-censorship. They reported that they were afraid of, and because, to get back to your point earlier, social media, I mean, there are terrifying social media apps. There's one, I forget what it's called. It's an anonymous social media app where the students don't have to identify themselves, so they can just target each other. And it's not going to go away, right? And so that'll just, if we cancel that one, another one will pop up. So I think in that sense, this idea of every person that you're dealing with, you have to take a beat and just see the humanity in them before you assign them a side. And that's the conversation we need to have. And I do think it's important for folks like us, the one thing we can do is bring people together. We can't tell them what to do, but we can bring them together.
I mean, we have to create the spaces that allow this and not just talk about it, but actually create a space that allows it and then model it, right?
And not call it safe.
No, it's not about being safe.
It's a space for open discourse, civil discourse. When you say safe, people say, I'll not be offended.
Everyone can be heard. There's a discipline around this, and there are roadmaps for this. But it's hard work.
Yeah.
And it's on top of all the other work we're all doing, right? So let's just name that and say that if we really think it's important, just like the society that is hosting this conference thinks, then we have to put some elbow grease behind it.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen by itself.
Well, and you guys are leaders. You've stepped up, right, to do that in your own way. And I think we have leaders across this room probably who've been inspired, I hope, by hearing them talk about their own challenges and how inquiry is playing out on their campuses. And we are 4 minutes over, so I'm going to say, I know Dean Konana has to run off. Believe it or not, this man has to keep working. And say, great panel, and thank you all. Can you guys help me thank them?